SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello friends, welcome to the class of Maritime Law. I am Dr. Ashutosh Acharya, Senior Assistant Professor from Law Center 2, Faculty of Law, University of Delhi. Today we will talk about in this class marine pollution by hazardous substances. This is lecture number 16. In the previous lecture, wherein lecture number 15, we discussed about marine pollution through oil. And today, continuing in the part 2 of marine pollution, we will talk about marine pollution through hazardous substances. Now, hazardous substances would include substances that are dispersed or discharged in seawater, leading to pollution in seawater. This pollution also constitutes a major source of pollution, and when we talk about hazardous substances, they vary in their categories. They vary with respect to their composition, elementary composition, or any other type of composition. Substances may be chemical substances, which may be plastic, which may be sewage waste, which may be domestic waste, any other kind of waste that is discharged into the seawater ultimately leads to damaging the marine environment, especially those substances which cannot be removed or which cannot be mitigated within the water, or which will not get dissolved in the natural environment, either in the water or in the surface of the water, which does not constitute any food source for the marine life also. So, in such scenario, the substances, especially which are chemical substances, hazardous substances, obnoxious substances, are one of the major area of pollution and problem as far as marine life and marine environment is concerned. So, what is the recourse or what is the solution to mitigate the circumstances leading to marine pollution through hazardous substances is concerned? So, in today's class, we will look at the causes of marine pollution in detail as far as different kinds of hazardous substances are concerned, in what all ways through hazardous substances marine pollution happens, what is the law pertaining to curbing down hazardous substances concerned, and taking from the previous lecture wherein we discussed and talked about two major environmental principles, and that is precautionary principle and polluter pays principle. How these two principles also come into play as far as reduction and reducing of marine pollution through hazardous substance. So, let us start with a little bit of introduction as far as pollution through hazardous substance is concerned. Pollution is among the major problems facing the marine environment. This is a global problem as 3/4 of the earth is covered by water. When our planet is viewed from space, the image instantly conveys the message that ours is a blue planet. These oceans are the largest habitats as the greatest number of marine creatures live in coastal waters. Friends, we must also realize the fact that the globe is consisting of lakhs of crores of species, many of which we have already either endangered by human activities, either they have become extinct or endangered. Therefore, we must realize the fact that our actions should not be for our survival only. Also, we must realize that our survival is also dependent upon the survival of other species. If we continue to pollute, then certainly we are not only threatening the existence of other species either on land or in sea water, we are actually directly or indirectly threatening the existence of human survival as well. So, it is incumbent and it is upon the human beings, it is the duty of the human beings to take care of marine environment, as the most of the globe is covered by sea and most of its species reside into the sea. So, therefore, discharging of pollution into the sea leads to not only endangering the species, but also extinction of a number of species. So, therefore, we must note that more than half of the world's populations are living near the coast. The sea plays the principal role in the transportation of products. Transportation, which is one of the traditional uses of the sea, is a major cause of marine pollution. Furthermore, the oceans provide the most economical route for the transportation of goods, and such trade underpins economic activities. While the benefits are enjoyed by people, the oceans are facing multifaceted problems occurring by intentional or accidental discharges by man. Now, what are operational and accidental discharges either through oil or of the nature of hazardous substances? As with respect to oil, we have already discussed, but with respect to hazardous substances, we must note that when ships sail through seawater, they also have some collection of garbage or sewage which is disposed of into the sea. The transportation is of such large and vast expanse that a vast number of or amount of disposal is made into the sea. Not only through ships it is done, but also the states also discharge and dispose of their waste into the sea. There have been images that you must have seen into the newspaper or on TV channels in newses, wherein we see how marine life has been damaged either through oil or through hazardous substances. Plastic has played a significant role as far as marine pollution is concerned, or in expansion of marine pollution. The disposal of plastic has resulted into being part of food chain. This plastic, when disposed of into the marine life, gets into the body or blood or stream or bloodstream of the marine life, and when this marine life is consumed by humans, that plastic also forms part or is coming or becoming the part and parcel of human body, ultimately leading to human body problem. So, when such human body problem comes into being, wherein plastic is entering into your body because of the consumption of fishes or other marine beings, we must note that ultimately, indirectly or directly, we are harming the human species also. Therefore, pollution is the introduction of harmful contaminants that are outside the norm for a given ecosystem. Common man-made pollutants that reach the ocean include pesticides, herbicides, chemical fertilizers, detergents, oil, sewage, plastics and other solids. Many of these pollutants collect at the ocean's depths, where they are consumed by small marine organisms and introduced into the global food chain. Marine pollution has been defined by UNESCO's Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission and the UN's group of experts on the scientific aspects of marine pollution, GESAMP, as the introduction by man, directly or indirectly, of substances or energy into the marine environment, including estuaries, which result or is likely to result in such deleterious effects as harm to living resources and marine life, hazards to human health, hindrance to marine activities, including fishing and other legitimate uses of the sea, impairment of quality for use of seawater and reduction of amenities. Further, we also see, apart from UNESCO, we have seen and we see that UNCLOS, that is United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea, also defines marine pollution under Article 1, Clause 1, Subclause 4. and it says that pollution of marine environment means the introduction by man directly or indirectly of substances or energy into the marine environment, including estuaries, which results or is likely to result in such deleterious effects as harm to living resources and marine life, hazards to human health, hindrance to marine activities, including fishing and other legitimate uses of the sea, impairment of quality for use of seawater and reduction of amenities. In this definition, marine pollution is caused by human activities, either by introduction of substances or energy such as dumping and oil spill, or by other legitimate uses of the sea. As far as oil spill is concerned, in the previous lecture we have discussed in detail how oil spill leads to the marine pollution. Here another aspect that we have to focus upon is through dumping and discharge of waste into the sea, excluding oil. So, what all those discharge and dumping would include? It may include the dumping of garbage that is collected from the land areas, the sewage is that discharged into the sea water, all of which falls under the hazardous substances with respect to marine environment. Apart from that, we also see that apart from human direct discharge or dumping, we also see that sometimes if a ship is carrying harmful chemicals and it collides or enters into some collision or meets with an accident, that accidental discharge can also leads to or concludes hazardous substances getting dumped into the sea water. So, due to not only direct and intentional discharge into the sea, but also sometimes due to accidental discharges also we see harmful chemicals becoming part of the food chain because they got dumped into the sea water. Therefore, marine pollution is caused by human activities, either by introduction of substance or energy such as dumping and oil spill, or by other legitimate uses of the sea like deep sea mining and offshore exploration activities. Now, in modern times, especially after the Second World War, we have seen significant expansion has taken place as far as offshore drilling is concerned. So, this offshore drilling is not only done for oil extraction, but is also done to extract different kinds of minerals. When these heavy machines are placed inside the water, sea water, it ultimately leads to discharge of hazardous harmful substances into the water. That is another major cause as far as marine pollution through hazardous substances is concerned. Shipping, waste from land and fishing can all be sources that bring harm to the marine environment. The definition is quite similar to the definition of pollution under Article 1, Clause 4 of the 1996 Protocol to the London Dumping Convention 1972, which states, pollution means the introduction by man directly or indirectly by human activity of waste or other matter into the sea, which results or is likely to result in such deleterious effects as harm to living resources and marine ecosystems, hazards to human health, hindrance to marine activities, including fishing and other legitimate uses of the sea, impairment of quality for use of seawater and reduction of amenities. Almost exactly the same definition is found in a number of regional conventions concerned with marine pollution. For example, it can be found in the 1978 Kuwait Regional for Cooperation on the Protection of the Marine Environment from Pollution, also known as Kuwait Convention 1981, Convention for the Protection of Marine Environment and Coastal Area of the Southeast Pacific, also known as Lima Convention, and the 1992 Convention on the Protection of the Marine Environment of the Baltic Sea Area, Helsinki Convention. So, these three conventions also have identical definitions. These are regional conventions and they have the identical definition within their document also. Now, Principle 7 of the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment at Stockholm in 1972 states as follows. The states shall take all possible steps to prevent pollution of the seas by substances that are liable to create hazards to human health, to harm living resources and marine life. to damage amenities or to interfere with other legitimate uses of the sea. So, our principle 7 denotes precautionary principle as far as United Nations Conference on the Human Environment at Stockholm is concerned, also famously known as the Stockholm Declaration. So, this principle 7 imposes a kind of international customary norm upon the states. So, the states are largely bound to take measures which are precautionary in their application, so that if the construction of the ship is of such a nature that it is very remote chance that if it meets with some kind of accident there will be a discharge, or if the certificates that are to be obtained by the ship, all of which is obtained and the regulations are implemented and executed by the flag state or the place of registration where the ship is registered. So, what all precautionary measures are to be taken, which may be at the level of construction of the ship, which may be at the level of the storage of the cargo, depending upon the nature of the cargo, then depending upon the different types of certifications with respect to crew manning and training as far as the transportation of goods are concerned. So, what all different types of measures are to be taken, what responsibilities are to be imposed upon the ship operators when they operate the ship as far as discharge of substances are concerned. So, the focus or the focal point of this particular declaration being the environment places responsibility upon the states to implement precautionary principle within their domestic legal system as well. Further, if you look at principle 21 of the declaration, it also provides that states must ensure in exercising their sovereign right to exploit their resources, that activity within their jurisdiction or controls do not cause damage to the environment of other states or of areas beyond the limits of national jurisdiction. The sources of pollution affecting the world's ocean are as variegated and numerous as the types of human activity. In the first place, they can be divided into major categories: land based and sea based sources. They can also be classified according to the type of human activity as disposal of domestic sewage and industrial and agricultural waste. So, within land or within the activities of the state, we can bifurcate the kind of waste that gets discharged, which may be domestic sewage waste, which may be industrial waste or agricultural waste. Deliberate and operational discharge, that is because of the necessity, out of the operational necessity if it gets discharged, or there is also deliberate, that it is not necessary, but it is still done just to avoid any extra effort that must be undertaken by the state or the polluter. Operational discharge of shipboard pollutants. Interference with the marine environment resulting from the exploration and exploitation of marine minerals. Disposal of radioactive waste resulting from the peaceful uses of nuclear energy and military uses of the oceans. Today, the vast number and size of ships provokes great concern about the heightened risk of marine pollution. Another traditional use of the sea, which is fishing, has also seen an unprecedented expansion. Practiced since time immemorial, ocean fishing has transformed into an industry which today impacts upon biological resources in even the farthest and most inhospitable ocean reaches. With the annual total catches of many stocks decreasing, it appears that the limit of sustainable exploitation of marine biological resources is close to being reached. Overfishing is not the only cause of concern. Marine living resources also are endangered by other uses of the ocean. In fact, fish now caught are increasingly showing signs of contamination and damage from pollution, including concentrations of carcinogens, tumors, wounds and malformations, which render them unsuitable for consumption and which threaten their ability to reproduce, which ultimately again will affect the human population, as fishing and fishes are considered to be one of the major food source for humans. And therefore, if there is reduction of fishes, if there is contaminated fishes available in the sea, the food resources will get substantially decreased again affecting the human life and human society. International Maritime Organization has developed a number of global legal frameworks related to shipping safety and marine environment in order to accomplish with its mandate of improving the safety and security of international shipping and preventing marine pollution from ships. The first law of the sea conference was held in Geneva 1958. This conference adopted 4 conventions on law of the sea, namely the Convention on the Territorial Sea and the Convention on the Contiguous Zone, then the Convention on High Seas, and lastly the Convention on Fishing and Conservation of Living Resources of the High Seas. Already there were certain other conventions with respect to the prevention of pollution from oil, such as Oil Poll 1954 was already in place. And therefore, we see the Convention on Fishing and Conservation of Living Resources on the High Seas also taking account of the pollution aspect. The 1958 UN Conference on the Law of the Sea prohibits the pollution of the sea by oil or pipelines as well as by radioactive waste and waste resulting from oil drilling on the continental shelf. In 1960, the second law of the sea conference was held in Geneva. The United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea, that is 1982, is the most comprehensive of the ocean treaties, which contains the protection of environment, obliging all nations to protect and preserve the marine environment. Part 12 of Articles 192 and to 237 of the UNCLOS regards the protection and preservation of the marine environment. So, there is a law under UNCLOS, there are provisions that takes care of the marine pollution. It imposes certain obligations upon the states and different stakeholders in order to mitigate the circumstances concerning marine pollution through hazardous substances as well as oil. Now, let us look at the sources of marine pollution, and if you look at the sources of marine pollution, we will see that we can divide them into 6 different categories, and they are given under section 5 of part 12 of the 1982 UNCLOS, and they are pollution from land based sources, pollution from sea based activities, which may be drilling and extraction and exploitation of resources, etc. And when you talk about land based resources, discharge of sewage materials and garbage and plastics, etc. Then pollution from activities in the area. When we say area, we talk about seabed area, international seabed area. So, pollution can also take place in the international seabed area, which might result into offshore drilling, or maybe because the area does not belong to any one particular sovereign state, it is easier to dump your waste into that particular area, since a flag state, since a particular coastal state will not, or any coastal state or sovereign state will not make any objection into that particular area. Fourthly, we have pollution by dumping, and then pollution from and through the atmosphere. The emission that is made by the ships that travel from one part to another part also releases the carbon and the gaseous substances into the air, ultimately leading to marine pollution and pollution from vessels. International legislation for the prevention of marine pollution has evolved along lines which reflect a generally agreed categorization of the sources of pollution which should be regulated. Now, firstly, pollution from land based sources. Land based pollution is the single most important cause of marine pollution. Land based sources of marine pollution have become the major contributor of pollution and contamination in the marine environment. Land pollution is a major problem around the world and is caused by a variety of factors. Some of the main causes of land pollution includes deforestation, agriculture, industry, mining, landfills and urbanization. Land based pollution can be thus defined as pollution of maritime zones caused by discharges from coastal establishments or other sources situated on land or artificial structures. Accordingly, land based marine pollution has a national source since it arises from an area under the sovereignty of an individual state. The threat of land based pollution to the marine environment is a serious one, since it mainly affects coastal waters, which are sites of high biological productivity. In other words, marine pollution from land based sources means pollution caused by discharge from land reaching the sea, which are waterborne, airborne or directly from the coast, including industrial outfalls and pipelines. Contaminants of land based sources are of various kinds. For example, sewage and ineffective sewage treatment, persistent organic pollutants POPs, radioactive substances, heavy metals, oil nutrients, sediment mobilization, litter plastics and physical alterations including waste from landfills sited near coastal areas, storm water runoff, shipbuilding yards and natural disasters and storms. Land based marine pollution arises from diversified human activities from both coastal areas and further inland. The activities include the daily life of humans, agricultural, industrial production as well as military activities. If there is any testing which is made, test of a new missile or test of a nuclear material also leads to some kind of or a certain kind of marine pollution. So, military activities are also significant where there is some kind of military exercise undertaken leading to dumping of waste coming or generating out of that particular military exercises. So, military activities are also a bigger source of marine pollution through hazardous substances. If there is a warlike situation, if there are two countries at war or there is armed conflict going on, will also result into destruction of marine life to a significant aspect, which can lead to wreckage of ships, which can lead to dispersal of chemical substances, hazardous chemical substances and dumping of different kind of waste and also may lead to oil spill as well. All of them are necessary and unavoidable for the operation of society. Land based pollution also includes garbage and other solid debris, especially plastics, notably polythene and polypropylene. Plastics are also discharged from ships, including fishing vessels that regularly dump nylon fishing nets. Plastics are estimated to make up as much as 95% of the marine litter found on coastlines, sea surface and the ocean floor. Marine litter made of plastic, polystyrene foam, metal, glass and other materials from land based sources has been found in all the world's oceans. The pollutants from land based sources cover a range of substances such as chemicals, oil and oily wastes, organic materials as well as some radioactive substances, and most of them pose a grave threat to the marine environment. The first treaty to establish detailed rules on land based sources of marine pollution was the Convention for the Prevention of Marine Pollution from Land based Sources 1974 and also known as Paris Convention, which agreed on the need to protect the marine environment of the Northeast Atlantic by supplementing the 1972 Oslo Convention. The convention was replaced by the 1992 OSPAR Convention. Marine pollution from land based sources is defined in Paris Convention as pollution of the maritime area through water courses from the coast, including introduction through underwater or other pipelines, from man-made structures placed under the jurisdiction of a contracting party within the limits of the area to which the present convention applies. Other international instruments that we see have defined the concept of land based marine pollution along with pollution and marine pollution, and the Montreal guidelines, for example, defines land based source as follows: municipal, industrial or agricultural sources, both fixed and mobile on land, discharges from which reach the marine environment, in particular from the coast, including from outfalls discharging directly into the marine environment and through runoff, and through rivers, canals and other water courses. Also we see that when rivers flow from inland water and they get mixed with the sea water, in such situation we see when the river is also polluted, the total sewage or the dumped waste crosses or passes with the river water and gets dumped into the sea water. So, river can also be one of the passage or one of the element or catalyst in polluting sea water. So, further we see it also includes underground water, groundwater courses, canals and via the atmosphere. Secondly, sources of marine pollution from activities conducted on offshore fixed or mobile facilities within the limits of national jurisdiction, save to the extent that these sources are governed by appropriate international agreement. Further, we have pollution from sea based activities apart from the land based activities. Marine pollution can be caused by sea based activities. Pollution from sea based activities is caused by the release of harmful substances arising directly from the exploration, exploitation and processing of the seabed materials. Seabed activities include exploration and exploitation of both the territorial sea or continental shelf and the international seabed. Marine pollution caused by seabed activities usually arises from oil spillage or gas escape during the process of exploration or transmission. We see in today's time, especially when there is a large focus on electric vehicles or moving or making the electricity as the main source or the primary source of energy and trying to replace oil based minerals to be the source of energy through EVs. When we look at these making of batteries, we will see that the raw material to be extracted is largely available in sea, especially in the form of polymetallic nodules, and these polymetallic nodules are found in deep sea beds, especially the deep areas of the ocean. And when they get extracted or when they might be get extracted, it will result into heavy drilling areas. And when heavy drilling takes place, it not only contaminates then one particular region, but significantly or adversely affects the marine life around that particular region. So, even if such activities are undertaken for economic development, shifting of sustainable energy, the balance has to be reached out, because so far we have not reached out the balance as a world community. Whenever we talk about the shifting of more sustainable energy resources, ultimately the human technical advancement results into damaging one or the other kind of environmental aspect. So, even if we are going to reduce the pollution by using EVs, we are ultimately going to pollute the marine environment. So, the recourse must be undertaken with respect to reaching out a balancing situation or balanced position as far as sustainable usage of energy is concerned, and also extraction and exploitation of resources are concerned. So, therefore, we must see that when seabed activities include exploration and exploitation of both the territorial sea and continental shelf and the international seabed, marine pollution caused by seabed activities usually arises from oil spillage or gas escape during the process of exploration or transmission. There are other sorts of pollution resulting from seabed activities. For example, the mud mixtures which are generated during offshore operations may also bring harm to the marine environment. So, marine pollution may also be caused by drilling operations which produce drilling mud, drill cuttings and produced waters. The drilling mud includes some known toxic pollutants such as hydrocarbons as well as concentration of heavy metals including chromium, cadmium, copper, zinc, lead, mercury and nickel. Sewage generated during the operations is also accountable for marine pollution. Both the Geneva and the Law of the Sea Convention address the general exhortations to states to take measures to avoid both deliberate and accidental seabed pollution. Every state shall draw up regulations to prevent pollution from pipelines or from exploration or exploitation of the seabed. The states are obliged to take in the safety zones around a continental shelf installation by all appropriate means for the protection of the living resources of the sea from harmful agents. Dumping at sea, another major source of pollution. Dumping includes not only nuclear waste disposal, but also industrial and domestic waste, all dumped directly or indirectly into the oceans by various states around the world's oceans. Article 1, Clause 5, Subclause A of the UNCLOS defines dumping as any deliberate disposal of waste or other matter from vessels, aircraft, platforms or other man-made structures at sea. Secondly, any deliberate disposal of vessels, aircraft, platforms or other man-made structures at sea. However, under Article 1, Clause 5, Subclause B, dumping does not include the disposal of waste or other matter incidental to or derived from the normal operations of the vessel, aircraft, platforms or other man-made structures at sea and their equipment, other than waste or other matter transported by or to vessels, aircraft, platforms or other man-made structures at sea operating for the purpose of disposal of such matter or derived from the treatment of such waste or other matter on such vessels, aircraft, platform or structures. So, it excludes certain portions of disposal as far as dumping is concerned. Secondly, it also excludes placement of matter for a purpose other than the mere disposal thereof, provided that such placement is not contrary to the aims of this convention. Dumping had been a popular way of disposing of waste resulting from land based activities. Such wastes include radioactive matter, military materials, including absolute weapons and explosives. Now, these weapons also contains huge quantities of chemicals, substances which results into damaging the marine environment and marine life. So, including absolute weapons and explosives, dredged materials, sewage, sludge and industrial waste. At the global level, dumping is regulated primarily by the 1972 International Convention on the Prevention by Dumping of Waste and Other Matter, which was superseded by the 1996 London Protocol. Under Article 210 of the UNCLOS, the states are required to adopt laws and regulations to prevent pollution of the marine environment by the dumping of sewage, sludge and other waste materials into the ocean. These laws and regulations must be no less effective than the global rules and standards. So, international standards must be complied with within the domestic legal system. Further, we have pollution from or through the atmosphere. Pollutants that are transported through the air to the oceans are often categorized as marine pollution through the atmosphere. For example, acid rain from the atmosphere enters the ocean, causing acidification of the marine environment. Atmosphere pollutants emanate mainly from the exhaust emissions from land, which contains sulfur oxide, nitrogen oxide and carbon dioxide. The first two cause acid rain, which results in acidification of the ocean, while the third contributes to global warming, which brings results of rising the temperature of the ocean. So, even if the activities are restricted or restrained to land, it can adversely affect the marine environment by exposure of the sulfur oxide, carbon dioxide and nitrogen oxide into the atmosphere. All of them harm the marine environment. However, pollution transported via the atmosphere may not, if at all, affect the marine environment of the state on whose land the sources are located. One of the largest source of atmospheric pollution of the marine environment is now carbon dioxide released from human activities, including the burning of fossil fuels, industrial processes and land use change. Now, friends, we must also note that this exposure is not only damaging the marine environment, but everything, since everything is connected in the atmosphere and environment, we must note that this is also leading to rise in, since global warming is coming into being, and due to global warming we see rise in the sea level, which ultimately is reducing the land area, which is expedient and which is affecting directly the human survival. The oceans absorb around one-third of the carbon dioxide produced by human activities, and this gives rise to the chemical process known as the ocean acidification. Other threats are air emissions from planes, which are true atmospheric sources of marine pollution. Also identifiable in this category is nuclear weapon testing, the remains of which and the effects of which resides for hundreds of years, and therefore it can lead to damaging a bigger portion of area into the marine environment. The fallout of radioactive particles from the atmosphere threatens the flora and fauna as well. Now friends, what is the international legal framework in relation to prevention of marine pollution? How international legal regime tackles and controls marine pollution from hazardous substances? Let us have a look at this particular aspect. When we looked at the MARPOL and OILPOL and other variant conventions which talks about mitigation of pollution, mitigation with respect to the pollution expansion as far as oil is concerned, we do not see many conventions or as far as hazardous substances are concerned. So, the political will towards reduction of hazardous substance pollution into the sea water is comparatively lesser as compared to the oil pollution. Now, this is largely because oil is a resource and we want to protect it, and it is very visible and difficult to clear that out. Further, yes, it is also difficult to clear out the substances disposed or hazardous substances disposed into the sea water, but the economic value of the waste is nothing as compared to the oil. So, due to this particular aspect, we do not see much political will and exercise as far as hazardous substances are concerned. It is only in the last 3 decades that we have seen the focus coming into being as far as mitigation of pollution with respect to hazardous substances is concerned. So, UNCLOS in 1982 did provide or does provide for a legal framework as far as hazardous substances are concerned. Also, it imposes obligation upon the states in general as far as pollution is concerned, but with respect to hazardous substance also we see UNCLOS deals with that particular aspect to a certain extent. So, the general legal framework under the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea 1982 is dealt under part 12 of the UNCLOS 1982, which contains 11 sections and 46 articles that set out to provide a general and comprehensive account of the marine environment. The 1982 United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea UNCLOS requires states to pursue 2 main environmental objectives: to prevent, reduce and control marine pollution, and to conserve and manage marine living resources. For both objectives, the 1982 UNCLOS establishes rules on information, scientific research, monitoring, environmental assessment, enforcement and liability. This convention includes a number of provisions to protect the marine environment, and this has been mentioned under article 192. Under 193, states have sovereign right to exploit their natural resources pursuant to their environment policies and in accordance with their duty to protect and preserve the marine environment. So, here a larger duty is incumbent upon the states, the coastal states, to protect the marine environment. However, specific rules and regulations are to be framed and met out by the states themselves. So, larger duty has been placed, but specific rules and regulations still are to be the domain of the sovereign states. States shall take individually or jointly as appropriate all measures necessary to prevent, reduce and control pollution of the marine environment from any source, mentioned under article 194 clause 1. Under clause 2 of the article 194, it further provides that states are to ensure that activities under their jurisdiction or control do not cause damage to other states or their environment, or that pollution spreads beyond the areas where they exercise sovereign rights. So, in order to achieve the global marine environment protection, Part 12 requires states to cooperate on a global and as appropriate regional basis, directly or through competent international organizations in formulating international rules, standards and recommended practices and procedures. So, the unclosed provisions are largely recommendatory in nature and are not imposing binding obligations upon the states, largely leaves upon the states to make rules and regulations. Now, provisions for pollution from land based sources under UNCLOS. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea is the only treaty which provides general obligations. Now, point to be noted here is that it provides general obligations to prevent land based pollution of the marine environment at the global level. The states are required to take all measures necessary to ensure that activities under their jurisdiction or control are so conducted as not to cause damage by pollution to other states and their environment, and that pollution arising from incidents or activities under their jurisdiction control does not spread beyond the areas where they exercise sovereign rights in accordance with the law of the sea. So, a general obligation to the fact that you must not pollute the area, or must not utilize the area which causes pollution, which does not come within the sovereign rights of the coastal states. Further, clause 3 of article 194 subclause A stipulates that measures taken pursuant to part 12 shall include inter alia those designed to minimize to the fullest possible extent the release of toxic, harmful or noxious substances, especially those which are persistent from land based from or through the atmosphere or by dumping. The provisions of article 207 of the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea deal specifically with pollution of the marine environment from land based activities. According to this particular article, all states, whether coastal or landlocked, must take measures including the adoption of the laws and regulations to prevent pollution of the marine environment from land based sources, including rivers, estuaries, pipelines and outflow structures, taking into account internationally agreed rules, standards and recommended practices and procedures. So, this must not be an excuse for the state that the river that is flowing into the sea water is already polluted and thereafter it pollutes the sea water. It is the duty upon the state under article 207, a general duty though, that through these waters flowing into the sea water, the polluted water must not fall into the or mix into the sea water. Besides, under article 207 of UNCLOS, states have the obligation to protect and preserve the marine environment by cooperating regionally and globally, and to adopt laws and regulations to deal with sources of marine pollution, and also laws that take measures to prevent, reduce and control pollution from land based sources and to re-examine them from time to time as necessary. In addition, article 213 calls for states to enforce these laws and regulations and to implement applicable international rules and standards to prevent, reduce and control pollution of the marine environment from land based sources. This later provision is repeated in article 207 clause 5 in the context of release of these substances into the marine environment. Now, pollution from seabed activities subject to national jurisdiction. The provisions of article 208 and article 214 of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea 1982 deal with pollution from seabed activities subject to national jurisdiction. The coastal states are obliged to adopt laws and regulations to prevent, reduce and control pollution of the marine environment arising from and in connection with seabed activities subject to their jurisdiction and from artificial islands, installations and structures under their jurisdiction pursuant to article 60 and 80. Such laws, regulations and measures must be no less effective than international standards. States shall endeavour to harmonize their policies on the regulation of pollution from seabed activities at the appropriate regional level. So, states not only have land based activities, but also have seabed activities, sea area activities, wherein they might have installations, they might be having artificial islands, and pollution could be caused by these installations and artificial islands or other seabed activities. So, under 208 and 214 article of the UNCLOS 1982, there is again a general obligation upon the states to mitigate the circumstances leading to pollution through these activities. Further, pollution from activities in the area, and by area we mean international seabed area, which is governed by part 11 of the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea. The provisions of article 209 and 215 of the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea 1982 deal with pollution from activities in the area. International rules, regulations and procedures shall be established in accordance with part 11 to prevent, reduce and control pollution of the marine environment from activities in the area. States are obliged to adopt laws and regulations to prevent, reduce and control pollution of the marine environment from activities in the area undertaken by vessels, installations, structure and other devices flying their flag or their registry or operating under their authority. Enforcement of such international rules and regulations is to be governed by part 11. Pollution by dumping. Under article 210 of UNCLOS, states are required to adopt laws and regulations to prevent, reduce and control pollution of the marine environment by dumping. Such laws and regulations shall ensure that dumping is not carried out without the permission of the competent authorities of states. Dumping within the territorial sea and the EEZ or onto the continental shelf shall not be carried without the express prior approval of the coastal state. National laws and regulations shall be no less effective in preventing, reducing and controlling such pollution than the global rules and standards. In relation to enforcement of laws and regulations with respect to pollution by dumping, this shall be carried out by the coastal state within its territorial sea, EEZ and continental shelf. With regard to vessels flying its flag or vessels or aircraft of its registry, the flag state is required to enforce laws and international rules to prevent pollution by dumping. Concerning acts of loading of waste or other matter occurring within its territory or at its offshore terminals, any state shall enforce laws and international rules to prevent pollution by dumping. So, if a ship enters into the EEZ of the coastal state can also take action, prohibit dumping by any particular flag state that is passing through the EEZ of a coastal state. Now, pollution from vessels. Under article 211, states must establish international rules and standards to prevent, reduce and control pollution of the marine environment from vessels and adopt routing systems to minimize the threat of accidents which might cause such pollution. They must also adopt national laws for vessels flying their flag or of their registry, which at least have the same effect as that of generally accepted international rules and standards. This commits all states to ensuring that their national law complies with at a minimum standards generally accepted under international law. Without prejudice to the right of innocent passage, states can establish internationally or as part of cooperative arrangements special rules for the prevention, reduction and control of vessel pollution as a condition for entry into ports or internal waters of foreign vessels. So, the innocent passage's understanding can be expanded and can be inclusive of the dumping aspect as well, and control of vessel pollution as a condition for entry into ports or internal waters of foreign vessels, provided they are given due publicity and communicated to international organizations. The states may also adopt laws to combat vessels pollution from passage of foreign vessels in their territorial seas, including those exercising the right of innocent passage. With respect to their EEZ, states may, for the purposes of enforcement, adopt laws and regulations which conform to and give effect to generally accepted international rules and standards. The aforesaid international rules and standards should include inter alia the requirement for prompt notification to coastal states whose coastlines or related interests may be affected by incidents, including maritime casualties which involve discharge or probability of discharge. In this respect, article 221 of UNCLOS provides that in taking measures to avoid pollution arising from maritime casualties, states have the right under international law to take and enforce such measures beyond their territorial sea so as to protect their coastline or related interest. A maritime casualty is described as a collision or vessels standing or other incident of navigation or other occurrence on board a vessels or external to its resulting in material damage or imminent threat of material damage to a vessel or cargo. flag, port, coastal state provisions on marine pollution. So, we have duties upon the flag state and port state and the coastal state. So, when we talk about enforcement by flag state, Article 217 provides enforcement jurisdiction of flag states. Flag states are required to ensure compliance by their vessels with applicable international rules and standards and with their laws concerning regulation of vessel source pollution. Flag states are also obliged to provide for the effective enforcement of such laws and regulations. Irrespective of where a violation occurs, 217 clause 2 article of the UNCLAUSE places an obligation upon the flag states to take appropriate measures in order to ensure that their vessels are prohibited from sailing until they can proceed to the sea in compliance with the requirements of the international rules and standards. Now, in India we have this Part A and Part B compliance, also certain certificates are to be obtained as far as the ship's construction, as far as the ship's compliance to certain norms are concerned, which also are helpful in mitigating the circumstances resulting into pollution. In relation to this, Article 217 clause 3 imposes on flag states a duty to ensure that their vessels carry on board certificates required by and issued pursuant to international rules and standards, and that their vessels are periodically inspected in order to verify such certificates. Enforcement by port states has been dealt under Article 218, and clause 1 of the UNCLAUSE has introduced a new mode of regulation of vessel source pollution by port states, under which it is provided that when a vessel is voluntary within a port or at an offshore terminal of a state, that state may undertake investigations, and where the evidence so warrants, institute proceedings in respect of any discharge from that vessel outside the internal waters, territorial sea or exclusive economic zone of that state in violation of applicable international rules and standards established through the competent international organization or general diplomatic conference. Then we have enforcement by coastal state, and Article 220 provides enforcement jurisdiction of coastal states, where when a vessel is voluntarily within a port or at an offshore terminal of a state, that state may institute proceedings in respect of any violation of its laws and regulations of that concerning vessel source pollution when the violation has occurred within the territorial sea or EEZ of that state. The coastal state is allowed to undertake physical inspection of the vessels where there are clear grounds of believing that the vessel navigating in the EEZ or territorial sea state has in the EEZ committed a violation referred to in Article 220 clause 3, resulting in a substantial discharge causing or threatening significant pollution of the marine environment, and vessel has refused to give information. So, for non-cooperation also we see that the liability can come into being. So, we have other conventions also, which are BWM Convention, International Convention for the Control and Management of Ships, Ballast Water and Sediments 2004, then International Convention on the Control of Harmful Anti-Fouling System on Ships 2001, then OPRC HNS Protocol 2000, which applies the rules of OPRC Convention to pollution incidents involving hazardous and noxious substances, and entered into force in 2007. Then we have liability and compensation regime under the UNCLAUSE under Article 235, which deals with the liability regime in general. So, this was an overview. In general, we see the causes of the pollution, the general obligation upon the states as far as hazardous substance pollution are concerned, and certain other conventions also in place with respect to certain specific chemicals, hazardous and obnoxious substances or discharge through ballast also. So, with this I conclude this lecture number 16 on marine pollution, hazardous substances. Thank you for your patient listening. Namaskar.